Let's get it.
Okay, I'm ready.
Yeah.
Welcome to episode 9 of the Bodcast, and today we're going to talk all about carbohydrates, the ultimate carb episode. So we'll discuss the different types of carbs, what we use them for, how our body uses them. We'll talk about carbs for performance versus aesthetics. We'll talk about carbs versus fats as energy sources. And do carbs make you fat? So it's going to be a very interesting one.
The big question.
The big question, yes. But I think first of all, we can talk about sort of the different types of carbohydrates and take you back to biology in high school. So the three main types of carbohydrates, you have monosaccharides, which just means one sugar. Then you have disaccharides, which means two sugars. And then you have polysaccharides, which means many sugars. So monosaccharides, think glucose and fructose. Disaccharides, think of sucrose and lactose. And polysaccharides, there's different, people sort of classify them differently, but one way I like to think of them is like digestible ones, partially digestible ones, and then non-digestible ones. So non-digestible ones, you can think of cellulose, a lot of like plant fiber that your enzymes just cannot break down. Partially digestible, think of something called inulin. Some people take that as sort of a digestive supplement almost. And then digestible is starch, glycogen, and dextrin, and that's CarbX. I was like, oh, how exciting. That's what CarbX is.
Yeah.
So it's a polysaccharide, but it's easy for your body to digest. So those are the main types of carbohydrates, and we mainly use them for fuel. That's what carbs are. I think Andy is the king of sort of blood glucose and insulin and all of that. So he's going to take us through sort of, how our body regulates glucose and things like that. So Andy, over to you.
Funny just to think about CarbX and how it's a branch cyclic dextrose. So the important thing to realise is the branching of glycogen and glucose molecules means that when we store it in the body, it's used as energy. Unlike if you get dextrose powder, which is just dextrose powder, it's got to be branched to be used by the body. So it means it takes a little longer to digest. Anyway, let's talk about blood glucose. So obviously, all carbohydrates are turned into essentially glucose. Even glycogen. It's stored. Carbohydrates are stored as glycogen by the body, but to be used as a glucose, because a glucose molecule is, and the way the body uses it is glucose. So a glycogen molecule holds thousands of glucose molecules, and it's kind of like a piggy bank of glucose. So glucose is used, very small molecules used by the body, broken down because the energy we use is from the carbon, the bond between the carbon atoms, which is created by sunlight in making a living plants. So it's these carbon bonds which is the energy. So the body needs to break down glucose, which is done by the liver. So with blood glucose, so what happens is we eat our carbohydrates, go into digestion, we get moved towards the liver, which then starts this sort of process of blood glucose. And the liver stores some glycogen, like a muscle does, in order to keep some level of blood glucose. So there's about 1,000 calories worth of glycogen within the liver to help with blood glucose process. And blood glucose is basically the energy, glucose molecules traveling in the blood in order to be picked up by cells. And cells pick up, I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible, but pick up glucose using a transport cell within the cell, a transport molecule, which cling on to the glucose and bring it into the cell for energy. So, we'll talk about T3 cells, the storage cells, which then we start storing blood glucose as glycogen. So, all this glucose is going around the body, nice, if it's at an ideal level, not much happens. Insulin is then put into the system to help store what the transport cells aren't using. So all our cells who need energy, because we move our arm or whatever, they're going to pull out that glucose using their transport molecules, drag it into the cell, use it for energy. But then what happens is, all that happens, and then we still got blood glucose. What's then meant to happen is our body releases insulin and pancreas in order to control how much glucose is floating around. So we don't want excessive levels of blood glucose because of things like diabetes and all factors related to that. So what happens is insulin increases. And the role of insulin is to start storing that glucose into cells, into muscle as glycogen via the T3 cells. So if we've got too much blood glucose, our body has to keep producing insulin, which affects the pancreas. It means our body loses its way in the sense of, how do I keep up with this insulin production? So we just keep pumping up more insulin, and then we end up with too much, and we then start storing too much glucose. So what happens is we end up with this seesaw, this sort of roller coaster of energy levels. And as we know, certain cells require glucose as an energy source, red blood cells and brain cells only use, unless they're in, for the brain, if you're in super starvation and you're going to die, it will start breaking down other things. But generally, all other times, it will use only glucose as its energy source, and same with red blood cells. So that's why, we see when people having diabetic going hyper or hypo, there is an effect on brain chemistry. People stop, especially being hyper. It's almost like someone's drunk. It's because there's too much blood glucose getting traveled to the brain, and the insulin, it's just trying to shuttle it everywhere. And so what happens is insulin then starts storing excessive blood glucose because your blood glucose is high, and then that's what becomes body fat, because it will convert to fat eventually. If you've got excessive glucose and you filled up your glycogen stores, glycogen in the muscles is about 3,000 calories worth. And once that's filled, we don't need to store anymore. And what's meant to happen is it then starts getting stored as fat cells, within the fat cells. So when it's excessive and our body can't deal with it properly, we just keep storing it. It becomes fat, or and other issues happen. I think that's it in the most basic sense.
Yeah, I think it's like our body's priority is to fuel the brain.
Yes.
It's its number one priority. And if carbs is the preferred fuel source for that, but like Andy says, it can then, if there are no carbs, it will find a way. And proteins can be turned into glucose as well. That's gluconeogenesis, and so can fats. But carbs are the preferred fuel source. So I think that leads us into something that a lot of people talk about in the sort of carb world, and that's the glycemic index of food. And so a lot of people are like, oh, you should eat low GI carbs, or you should have a high GI carbs. And so basically, GI index is a measure of how quickly and also significantly significantly a certain food affects your blood glucose levels. And very generally, sort of the less processed a food is, the lower the GI number. So it takes longer for you to digest. So you can think like what legumes, veggies, whole grains, and then higher GI foods are like bread, sweets, things like that. I mean, fruits, this is where sort of fruits can get that sort of bad reputation. We're like, well, it's got a higher GI index, but you've also got the fiber in there. So GI is also affected by, what do you eat your carbs with? If they're with a fat and protein, that automatically lowers, its impact on blood sugar. And like Andy has just discussed, we want to keep blood sugar relatively stable. And so you can get insulin spikes. Like you've probably all had that. You've had like a packet of Haribos and you'll get like a serious insulin spike, blood sugar spike, and then kind of a crash. So you want to keep it stable throughout the day if you can. And that generally means, like, as we always say, have a balanced meal. You're not just eating carbs by themselves. You'll have them with your protein and your fat, and if you've got a lot of fiber in there, that slows it down as well. So it's GI is not the be all and end all. And I mean, the only time that I've sort of heard and seen sort of research for low GI carbs is for PCOS, where it has shown to be helpful, and maybe for diabetics as well in managing their blood glucose levels. But normally you would want to minimize your sort of higher GI foods anyway, just as part of a balanced diet, not to be living off processed food and sweets and things like that. But having rice is generally a higher GI food, but rice is life. And to think about,
You also don't eat rice on its own, do you?
No.
It's not like you're just going to eat a big pile of rice.
Yeah. Well, I would eat rice by itself.
Rice and ketchup I wouldn't mind some.
Yeah, rice and ketchup. Oh, rice.
I could eat rice, but you just don't,
Exactly, that's the thing.
Rice with a little bit of salt on it would be lovely.
You always somehow just find something that goes with it. It's like oats, I guess, the same.
It's got some, But I guess that's just to keep in mind, like when you hear, I don't know, people have such polarizing opinions on like good carbs, bad carbs, and it's like, okay, yes, there is lower GI carbs, but if you're overall looking at making, having balanced meals, you will be okay. But just to realize that that's what does cause that sort of insulin spike when you do have higher GI foods.
And it's just for, I think that people, that's a good, like what you said, because I know people who are like, I'm sure even you guys have gotten clients who are like, but brown rice is better than white, and it's exactly what Claire is talking about. There's no like brown is better. It's just
I always say brown rice tastes like crap.
It does.
But have some other fiber with it. As a thing, it doesn't have to be, we're talking about meals, and as long as you've got a good fiber source, which is slow to break down, you've got a little bit of fats in there and the protein in there. Everything slows back down in the stomach because higher calorie meal, you have to digest it more. In the fiber, it's mainly not being funny. A lot of that GI index is affected by fiber. Fiber just slows down everything. So if you're having something like rice or even bread, if you're having it as part of a meal with things like with vegetables, and you're not overcooked vegetables, like with things like salads, or like quite some nice good bit of broccoli, cabbage or whatever, but it's still quite fibrous, you'll be fine.
Because that's the whole white, brown. It's just the brand. It still has its fiber, but that's about it.
And I'm always quite honest with clients. Like, eat things that you enjoy eating. We just find a way of making it slightly better for you, as in, increasing fiber, because meals should be enjoyed. Food should be enjoyed. In fact, that helps you digest it as well.
Yeah, because
if you're not salivating, you're missing a whole bit of a process of digestion.
Yeah, I must be yet to find anyone who likes brown rice. So if you're a listener of the podcast,
dislike it. It's just like there's white rice.
Like all clients who we've had the brown versus white conversation, it's more of a I heard someone say,
well, it's
or
always
I
sort
read.
of drilled into you. Oh, always have brown bread. I love white bread. My goodness.
If any of our listeners likes brown, just
well, it's part of that whole diet culture kind of thing. You're told, eat the brown version.
Yeah, I think the only problem with white bread in Kenya, especially, is it's so pumped for the sugar.
Man.
It tastes amazing, honestly. Like every time we have a loaf of white bread in the house, it goes in seconds because kids go mental for it. But that's brown bread's better as a parent because it doesn't get eaten within minutes, right? But that's the only thing. So the white bread in Kenya is so sweet. It's like if you go to a proper bakery, you get a nice loaf of bread. It's great. Yeah, but if you just buy it out the supermarket, it's like, ooh.
Yeah, I guess brown sort of carbs are better when you're dieting because you just don't want to have too much. you'll
more fiber, but
you wouldn't really have too much or enjoy it. So
well, I think that's another episode about sugar and it being addictive, but we will not go on that tangent.
No.
But you know that I always see that truck and it's called like butter toast.
Yeah, I love that stuff. So tasty.
But
it's like crack.
The marketing is on point for that thing. Like I follow that butter toast and I can just taste it.
Thing is, it is so tasty. Like it's like crack butter toast. Yeah, when you toast it and put your butter on it,
it is.
It's got so much sugar in it. It's so sweet. Plus, there were creamy.
Sorry.
Tasting.
No, we got a power trip.
We can hear it. It's so annoying.
Sorry.
Internet.
I can see you guys. But yeah, so butter toast is the crack.
Just amazing. If you ever come to Kenya and you have butter toast, you'll never go back.
The thing is, it lasts in this house about 2 minutes, I think, because the staff like butter toast, kids like butter toast. I can't have it because I'm on prep, but if I was in off season, I might even have a slice of it.
So if you remember back to the cardio podcast where we were talking about the different energy systems, that kind of understanding carbs and understanding the energy systems is really important. So remember, we've got the 3 energy systems. We've got the ATP PCR pathway, we've got the glycolytic pathway, and we've got the oxidative phosphorylative one. And it's all about ATP. And if you remember, that's the body's energy currency. And we glucose is broken down into I think it's glucose 6-phosphate or something. It's that phosphate used to create ATP. So, and carbohydrates are the body's preferred fuel source for that. Mm-hmm. So if you remember, the energy systems are always kind of interlapping, they interplay with each other. And because they, like ATP kicks in fast, it's the quickest one, then it goes into the oxidative, and that's where you're now using glucose. And then as you carry on, now you use, that was the glycolytic. Then you start to use other fuel sources, as your glycogen runs out.
Yeah. It's important to understand that the role of glucose in making macromolecules. So a macromolecule is, one's ATP, as we're discussing, one's DNA, which is pretty important. And then you have RNA, which a lot of people are starting to understand because of the Pfizer vaccine affecting RNA. And then there's NADPH, which is to prevent oxidative stress. So these are macromolecules, which are super important in the body. They're made by carbohydrates, ATP being one of them, which is then used for this energy conversion.
So there's always we're always breaking compounds down and then building them. So you're going from glucose to glycogen and then glycogen to glucose all the time. And I mean, these have fancy names. You've got glycogenolysis, where you're now turning glycogen to glucose, and then you've got glycogenesis, where you're going glucose to glycogen. So glycogen is the stored form of glucose, as Andy said, and that's in the muscle and in the liver. So if you need, and then with insulin, your body can, if it needs glucose, it will break down glycogen. And if you've got too much glucose, it's going to be stored as glycogen. So Andy touched on briefly how if you've got excess glucose, it can be stored as fat. And that's by a process called de novo lipogenesis. But it contributes a very small percentage body fat. It's very small. So everyone's like, oh, that's how carbs make you fat. It's like, well, no, it's actually a very small percentage, but it does happen. So, when you look at like low carb diets, high carb diets, and the interplay of carbs and fat on storing body fat, it's really interesting. As you've got a limited amount of glycogen, like Andy said, in your body. Your body fat is your main energy source, because if you didn't have that, if you ran out of glycogen, you'd die pretty much. Evolution has come up with us storing, most of the energy as body fat. So the intake of carb or fat will then affect the metabolism of carb or fat. So when you are having more carbohydrates in your diet, you're going to use more carbohydrates for energy. You'll have more insulin, and insulin actually impairs fat oxidation and lipolysis, which is the breakdown of fat, or what you want to call fat burning. So again, that's where people are like, oh, well, then that's why carbs make you fat. And there's a whole theory of the carbohydrate insulin obesity model, and that's what they say. But you are still eating fat and, on a high carb diet. So the body is going to preferentially take that fat straight into your body fat storage, because there's very little conversion required.
Yeah.
Now, so, I mean, that kind of, it does your brain in a bit. So a high carb diet means more insulin, which is actually going to impair fat oxidation and sort of fat burning, but the fat that you do eat is going to go straight to your body fat. So if you're, then that all goes down to what we've talked about before, which is calories in, calories out. It's all about your net energy.
And this is why I do like assigning macros, because it means you can balance that quite well. The fact is, the body wants to use glucose as energy, glycogen, glucose, but it gets used up quick, especially if you're doing endurance sport. So we need that body fat as a longer term storage solution. It's a bit like having stuff in your house, but also maybe having a big yellow storage container somewhere with stuff you don't need so often. It's there and we use it. But the problem is, it's there for a purpose. But if we keep just adding to it, we end up with like being a hoarder. You can't get through your house. So it's that's what we just got to think about. It's just sort of balancing and having a balanced approach to food. If you just trying to live your healthiest, best life, you just have a nice balanced approach. You have moderate carbohydrates, you have a good level of fat, from decent fats, and you have protein, and then your body's going to be happy with you. It's not going to have excessive fat storage. It's going to have just enough. It's going to have your glycogen storage of 4,000 calories stored, and that's kind of what you want. Obviously things like diabetes and insulin issues do change the landscape a little bit, because we end up just storing more and more, not via choice. But yeah, as you said, most you can approach it any way you want. If you go with a high fat, low carb, if you're still in an energy surplus, you're still going to be storing fat because you are not using it up as energy at any one point. So if it's not used, it gets stored. And since we have fat cells for that very purpose, that's what's going to take it.
Yeah, I mean, that's what keto people are like. Oh, well, if you're eating more fat, you're burning more fat, which is true. You are, but you're also storing more fat.
Yeah, and the magic number is still calories in versus calories out. And this is the thing. Being keto, all generally happens when people start first losing weight. I love the keto approach. I do well on keto, not because, probably because I got dodgy blood glucose, but you still need some carbohydrates even when doing keto, for your brain and red blood cells. Mm-hmm. But here's the thing: if you're still excessively eating, you're still gonna get fat. You're trying to use lipids instead of carbohydrates as your main fuel source, and your body will because it's very adaptive. But it doesn't mean you're at your optimal. And if you're still in calories, and I've seen people do keto where they're banging in, wake up coffee with a lot of butter in it. Then they're going out, sausages and bacon. Well, delicious. I don't know. I imagine coffee and butter, tastes disgusting. But I just don't like coffee. But now when we get on to constantly saturated fats and all these fats, and you're like, still calories, still quite a lot of, and per gram, it's more calories. So therefore you end up in this trap of, if you're not, even on keto, you should be monitoring your calories in versus calories out,
Right.
And then you find a lot of people still add, ketones, because all the ketone supplements out there being sold by the
and these make me laugh. I've had arguments online about ketone drinks.
Yeah,
it's the same as having a Gatorade.
Mm-hmm.
When you're exercising. So if you're saying your chosen energy source in your body is going to be a lipid, it's going to be the fatty acid, right? You are using ketones to sort of replace that as the energy source, because that's what the energy source is. So you're using ketones. There's no difference to just drinking glucose, like having a Lucozade Sport. They're saying, oh yeah, no, I'm doing it and I'm going to lose fat at the same time. No, you're not.
No.
That is an exogenous energy source coming into your body, which has calories.
Yeah.
Bit like when you have a Lucozade Sport, with sugar in, you're just taking that glucose. I know, like when I was growing up, it was brilliant. If you were ever ill, the cure was a Lucozade. Right? You would get, like, honestly, in the UK, and there are people listening who might have grown up in the UK who are similar age to me. Like when you were like off sick, someone would always bring you a bottle of original Lucozade, the one that doesn't taste quite as nice, right? And you drink that, and for energy essentially. And it was like almost seen as not like a miracle cure, but like as part of the being sick process, like to give you a bit more energy. But
well, yeah.
But you're not using, you're laying on the sofa trying to watch daytime TV rather than go to school. You got your Lucozade. That's just energy you're not using.
Yeah,
it's just like,
probably get pumped on sugar and start thinking, oh, I'm feeling.
Well, that's why it makes you appear like you've got more energy.
Yeah.
But you don't. You're just full of your like glucose insulin spike situation. But
So just remember it. Whether you're on high carb or low carb diets, it doesn't matter. The calories in, calories out is still going to determine whether you gain or lose weight.
Yep.
But if you're high carb, low fat, or low fat, high carb, it is going to affect your performance. So I think that gets nicely into using carbohydrates for performance, because if you remember the energy pathways, they kind of kick in. Like if you're now using fats for your fuel source, that's pretty slow. Fat oxidation is slow, so if you're into sort of sports performance, things like that, or you might have experienced it yourself where you're training or you're out doing exercise, you just feel like you've hit a wall, and that's you running out of glycogen.
Yeah.
Much. So keto is not the best dietary approach if you're into sports performance at all, because like I've just said, it's a slower, less efficient pathway for energy. So if you
were to ask the Olympians, go to the Olympics and say, who's keto here? The answer would be no one.
No one, no.
No one. Because it's just not optimal. Now, and that's an important thing to understand, that, carbohydrates are our body's chosen energy source. So if you want to improve performance,
you need your carb.
The best way is via, glucose. And, quick creation of ATP, and we'll go, because the ketone process is a lot slower and very inefficient. And then also things like, when we run out of carbohydrates or low carbohydrates, we then start breaking down proteins, because proteins are built of amino acids. We can't store amino acids. So therefore, to get amino acids to then turn into an energy source, as we say, we have to then break down the amino acids, and we use those. So, which then affects performance, because you're going to be weaker. You don't have, that sort of, muscle endurance. Your muscles get broken down. You're more likely to be injured. There's lots of things that go with that. People don't think about. That's why when you run a marathon or you're doing a major endurance event, there is usually at various stations things like, I don't know if it's still now, but last time I ran marathons, you used to have one water station, one isostar station, and you would carry carbohydrate gels. Because what you don't want to do is start then getting down into having no glucose left.
Yeah.
No glycogen left. So, if fats were the body's energy source, you would have ketone drinks at these things, but you don't. You have carbohydrate drinks, which is a clear, someone somewhere who knows what they're doing have decided carbohydrates are better than, for the energy than having, a bottle of olive oil at every stop.
Which is a very good point, because a lot of people forget you need to sort of replenish the glycogen before it's over. But you find it's why, I guess, I'm sure even you, when after you train or your last meal, like you like having your carbs at night because you train in the morning. So, replenish the glycogen stores. So when you go into your workout, you can perform. And what most people do, where you hear, I'm tired today, then you ask what you ate, and it's just not optimal, and you find your glycogen is just way too low. And a lot of people, that's one thing I guess you need to remember: just replenish your glycogen, use your carbs before it runs out. That's why with the running and cycling, after every sort of few meters, they take the drinks, because they have to, otherwise you start getting the muscle cramps, too much nitrogen in the blood, and it's
exactly. And it's one of those things, it's a knock-on effect. If you, as we say, there's only 3,000 calories worth of stored glycogen within muscles. On average, it varies between people. Imagine some of the bigger bodybuilders that have really bubbly muscle have probably more. They build up over time. But generally, so you, it's a knock-on effect. So you get one day where your carbs are low. If you don't then replenish on the next day, on a scale. So when you finally do need to use that glycogen, your levels are low, because it's been a knock-on effect all week. You've been using without replenishing enough, you kind of want to go into a performance event with full glycogen, decent blood glucose levels. You want your liver full of glycogen with its spare glucose as well. So you want to be maximized. And this is why, when I was growing up, people used to say big pasta meal the night before, in the morning, have some carbs, And I used to religiously before rugby games every morning have 2 Weetabix in a bowl of porridge.
Nice.
With so much sugar added, it's pretty much the sweetest thing you've ever tasted.
Yeah.
Delicious. No wonder my blood glucose is the best. No, but I would do that before every game, and and the night before you would have a carb. I remember running marathons and binging on pretty much a big bowl of pasta the night before, huge. But there is method to that. It's probably not ideal for instant spike that evening, but if you were to have a good meal with a lot of carbohydrates the night before with fats and protein, and then same thing in the morning, just to know that you are full, so you are at your peak performance. So then when you're running, say, you can pick up your carbohydrate. You guys plunge into darkness. You have your carbohydrate gels, you have your Isostar drink or Gatorade or whatever it may be, as you run around, and you're just topping up those glycogen stores. You don't want to hit the wall. You will hit the wall eventually in a marathon, but a lot of other, if you're running a 10K, you shouldn't probably hit it. Well, if you've got enough, if you take some energy gels with you and you have eaten properly, you probably won't hit a wall in a 10K race.
Yeah.
I ran a few 10K races and never hit a wall.
Yeah. I mean, we talk about in general, nutrition, just being balanced throughout the day. But if you're looking to enhance your performance, then, now it starts to become more important, the different types of carbs you eat and when. So like the gents were just saying, if you're someone who likes to train in the morning, but you don't want to wake up at 5 a.m. and eat your Weetabix and oats combo, you can make sure you have a high carbohydrate meal the night before, because I can't remember the exact percentage, but your glycogen stores in your muscles won't be that depleted in the morning at all. And then if you're training on that, you can just make sure you have, because now you know about the cyclic dextrin, you can have that as your sort of intra workout, just to keep your performance high. And then after you've trained, you want to replenish your glycogen stores, like Leon said. So by having more carbohydrate, insulin is going to say, all right, you need to take that glucose into the muscles and the liver, and that helps with your muscle recovery. So it is really important, if you want to, really enhance that performance, to see where in your day you're training, where to eat carbs, and to eat different carbs. You can eat sort of the lower GI carbs, an hour or so before you train, and then maybe some fruit half an hour before you train. So that's where it is good to know about the different sort of GI indexes of food. And to manipulate that, and again, if a lot of people try and keep a lot of their carbs around the workout, because that's when you're going to use it more.
That's what I tend to do myself, and I tell my clients to say, have the bulk of your carbohydrates around your training window. If you're going to train in the morning, that the pre-training meal is your last meal at night, and you should try and do that as close to bedtime as you can sleep well with. Right, because I always say, if you can, let's try and have almost pre-digested carbs for before training. If you can't eat a full meal early, maybe have something like a smoothie where we've pre-broke it down through blending. So you break down a lot of in the fruit, the cellulose, or the fibers in the fruit, and we try to do that, because it's better to always have something before training if you can. If you can't, as I said, you should have it before, the night before, and also make sure you're hydrated. Here's the other thing with training first thing. You do need to probably take a rehydration sachet or something, because the glass of water you have may not hydrate you fully, and you're likely to test. That's a different subject. So I always say, round your training window, majority of carbs. Post-training can be, I just eat the same meals because something like that. But if I was, in a full-off season, you would have your sort of quicker absorbing carbohydrates post-training as well, to quickly get shuttled in. Things is why people like cereal post-training or cream of rice post-training, because it is a quick release. Is that very quickly absorbed into the the blood glucose, and then can be shuttled into the muscles. And you're at your sort of optimal replenishment stage post-training. So it's that is what you kind of want where to be. So you always got enough glycogen in your muscles to be ready, and then you replenish it straight after your session, and then your other meals are just to top up what you've been using in between.
That's why my post-workout meal is my favorite meal of the day. I look forward to it every day because of my cereal bowl. So
choco shells.
Because after my post-training meal, the rest of the meals, it just goes to a lesser amount of carbs, and then well, if it's a training day, obviously the last meal I'll have my protein and probably seeds if we have any, but it just gets less and less. But my rice pre-training and then post-training is just where my bulk of carbs is to replenish all.
I think I always say also it's good to save a few carbs for pre-bed. If you train late. Because of what we talked about with sleep. Because don't forget, carbs are used to shuttle the amino acids across the blood-brain barrier. So, tryptophan, we want to shuttle that across to create the serotonin, melatonin. So it's kind of how I structure it. And as I was saying to think clear, I don't know if you were earlier on, before we start recording, was with all my clients, not all actually, but with most of them, rest days are lower carbohydrate days because they're less active. There's a lot less glycogen to have to replenish. And all our diet, I always say, is built around training performance. We're not necessarily, we're keeping activity levels high to burn fat, and we're manipulating it to lose body fat. But generally, we want the best training sessions we can get out of ourselves every single time.
And I think if you're into any sports and, whether it's endurance, bodybuilding, strength sports, you really should consider your carbs. If anything, put them more around your training rather than even maybe sleep time, especially if you're into the sport,
definitely
your job.
Well, it gets interesting now when you go into aesthetics. It's different and it's not.
It's not,
Because if it's aesthetics, you're trying to maintain what you've built. And like we've always said, you were trying to keep the muscle. And to keep the muscle, you still got to be signaling to the body in your training sessions that you need it. So you actually need your performance to still be good when you train. And that can be hard when your carbs are getting low. But just like we were saying, you can still choose where you're going to eat those carbs to fuel your session of the day. And like before I started taking CarbX, I would hit that wall, in the training session, and it would be a pretty terrible session. But when I took CarbX, I'm like, this is amazing. And I'm really looking forward to using it in my deficit, because yes, it might be a little bit painful thinking, I'm giving my carbs to this drink. It's not filling or anything, but it's enhancing your performance. And maybe you're going to be burning more calories in that session because you can perform better for longer. So, you can still manipulate your carbohydrate intake and timing around your session to, make sure that your performance is as good as it can be. But I mean, you guys as bodybuilders, I think it's interesting how, you can really, manipulate your carbs, especially around, peak week, show day.
I think in general, we got to realize that for every gram of stored glycogen, you need 4 grams of water. And that is what gives the muscle a look, as in, so imagine a muscle's like a water balloon.
Yeah.
And what you're pouring in is like a salt water or sugar water, so you have like dissolved, it's going to go in there. But, what you want to do is fill that up so it's nice and tight. But you don't want it to pour out over the top. But you also don't want it to be half filled and look saggy.
Yeah.
So, we just keep pouring the sugar water in until we find the right level. And that is what the hard bit is. It's like filling up like a bucket. You don't want to overfill it and spill it all over the floor. So, and when you hear people talking about bodybuilders, he's spilled over. And I've done it. This is why mock peak weeks are quite good, because different people load, have preferred loading methods, but they don't always work with everyone. So you can back load on a prep week, on a peak week. You can front load. You can moderately load across the week, and it's all very individualistic.
Yeah.
Some people will slowly fill up and look great by show day. Some people need to have carbs thrown at them, almost spill over a little bit, and spend 2 days getting back to that sort of right level. But you tell us your methodologies, Leon.
No, I remember first, I guess, learned the hard way. First competition, I was almost too full. Second one, no, first one I wasn't full enough. Second one, just slightly, but it's I guess it's the same where with the previous ones, even one, I didn't pick too long. It's very individualistic, like you said. Some people have a peak week, some don't need a peak week. So
That way.
or I think was the second one, the prep was good because unlike the first one where I over cardioed, this one was, I played with the cardio depending on how I looked, and had a help from a friend who coaches in the UK, so it kind of helped. So when I felt like I spilled over, got into the cardio, worked out the rest of the water carbs. But it's amazing how when you just have too much carbs or less carbs in a few hours, when you're doing your check-in sort of photos, you can really see the difference the carbs make. And also it just depends individual to individual, because also everyone have prep. Some have had to pick, some honestly did not need to pick. And sadly, a lot of people, I don't know why guys run to cardio first before, the food, and cut out all the carbs and increase cardio when you need the carbs for your performance.
Well, that's the thing. I believe in cardio. So, at the start of, depending on how you're going to do your peak week load, you should, if you got cardio in, it means you're not ready.
Exactly, yeah.
Right, on peak week. So therefore, there's no point loading at all anyway. Don't try and have a peak week. Just get shredded, and you've got a few days to do that. So, then you're probably going to show running flat, but at least you'll be in condition. As we say, the thing is with this whole balloon and spilling over is what people, if you don't know much about bodybuilding, is your muscle's got a certain level of detail. Like when you tense your muscle, you'll see moves and curves. Now, when that's with glycogen, you lose all those intricate details.
Yeah.
So for people listening or watching, the important thing is understanding that you want those details in. So there's the fine line of having your muscle big enough to see that detail,
But
so not small enough it looks like it's not full and you're flat and which then makes your skin a little saggier because it's not been pressed tight by the muscle. But then there's too much where your skin's tight and you're full, but you lose all the detail in the muscle and you look smooth, round and smooth. But so what you want is, you've got to see someone like Dorian Yates. Look at Dorian Yates on the computer, and you'll see, like, the striations in his muscle, the little lines that you can't see normally until you've got like really thin skin and your muscles are pressed against it. So what you don't want is when the muscle spills over, that gap between the muscle and the skin fills with fluid, because it can't be stored in the muscle. Excess fluid goes somewhere. Yeah. And people try to save that with pro bodybuilders try to save that with diet, and all that tends to happen then is it also takes some fluid out of the muscle. As we know, you need a certain amount of fluid to glycogen ratio.
And I think also a lot of people I've noticed do the excess cardio or the interesting carb ups because they follow a lot of pro bodybuilders who
exactly. I was gonna say this.
Dennis help. Yeah. So
you see smaller guys trying to do what, say, a pro bodybuilder different, because I don't think a lot of people can get away with backloading carbohydrates, saving. You see like some pros having burgers and fries the night before a show, or maybe, but they can get away with it is in the fact that they've got bigger muscles, so therefore they have a way higher calorie threshold than you do. Yeah. Right. And what happens is, smaller guy would probably better off it slowly across the week. When we reach that right point, stop. No more carbs. You're there. Stop most of your activity. Just chill out, relax. And then, just have like rice cake and a bit of peanut butter.
Yeah, like second competition, my friend was helping me out, and I'm like, can I, do I need the burgers? And he's like, no, man, you just carry. Because I was like, are you serious? Like, you don't need. Trust me, you don't need. Just carry the rice cakes. I had my rice and my steak in the morning, and then rice and chicken breast. And he's like, just keep to your usual peak week diet and carry your rice cakes. We'll be backstage. We'll work with it as the hours go by. And I was like, no burgers and fries. It's like, okay, I guess I don't need. It's like you don't need that much sodium. You trust me.
Exactly.
Yeah. So compared to what I'd done previously, where you see the pros and it's men's physique guys, but obviously they're also on some stuff. And
huge guys still.
Yeah. After prejudging, I'm going to have my big square burgers and fries, and then wait to fill up and look like a monster. But it's
it doesn't happen. You end up, if your muscle bellies aren't big enough, you end up spending every time. The fact is, you don't even need a lot of protein in peak week. All you're doing is manipulating those carbohydrates, and
carbs and water.
There's a fine line between hitting it and missing it. And the problem is, and to most people you won't even notice. Like, you'll see someone who's overfilled, and to the general public they'll look much the same. But on the bodybuilding lineup, when we're against guys who've hit their peak perfectly, 100% on, you'll notice, you go, oh yeah, he's flat, or he's really full, but I can't see. He looks like a smooth bowling ball. We've lost the detail in the abs, or the, wherever it may be, triceps. So it's such a fine line. And the thing is, with that is, if you're not a big guy, you want to fill up, but you don't have big glycogen stores. Your glycogen stores are smaller. And same with women, female, be it, with someone like a bikini athlete, you can get away with being overfull because you don't need the detail. The detail's actually the opposite of what's required. You want to have the shape for lines, but without the striations. Wellness is a little bit drier still. Then you've got figure, which you should be seeing some detail, but not too much. So, I think it gets a little bit more complicated as you go up to female categories. Female physique, you want, there's pretty much detail, but not too much. Female bodybuilding's back now, so yes, crazy. But so but you've got smaller. Say go back to big yellow storage containers. You're filling your storage up, but if you've only got a 20-foot container, don't try and stick 40 foot's worth of goods into that container. It's as simple as that. It's got to go somewhere. It ends up spilling out the front door.
Yeah, I mean, I think people who aren't bodybuilders, they're like, wow, this is some crazy science going on here. And it is. I mean, that's what bodybuilding is. You're manipulating every possible factor to look a certain way. But it just shows across the board, whether you're a bodybuilder, you're a performance athlete, you're someone who's in the general population, carbs are life. Carbs are not the enemy. Carbs are your preferred fuel source. So hopefully from this podcast, by understanding kind of, the different types of carbs, how your body uses carbs, putting that with the cardio episode on your body's different energy systems and how carbs are, they're our body's favorite fuel source. We need it for our brain. You need it to function. And eating excess carbs is not necessarily, making you fat. It's overall calories if you're eating in excess that make you fat. So it's calories in, calories out. And there are no good carbs, there are no bad carbs. There are low GI, there are the high GI, and when you're getting more into your performance, and also your aesthetics, when you eat them does make a difference. But we hope this episode has been useful to illuminate the wonderful world of carbs. And we will be doing a series on the other macronutrients as well. We'll talk about fats and protein as well. And I think we will call it a day here on carbs. And on that note, we're going to go and eat some carbs, I think. I'm training.
First meal.
No, I'm not training.
I'm going to try and get 2 meals in before I train. So I'm going to train in Nairobi today.
Oh yeah, you're coming to the big city.
Oh yeah.
I've got to do some errands. So
where are you going to train?
Probably I'm going to meet up with Nick, who's also trained by Ollie, and train by his gym at Westgate.
Nice.
To be fair, it's a nice gym, but the equipment sucks. It's nice, but the equipment's a bit funny and weird, and it doesn't. It's a bit more look than substance.
Yeah.
But it's usable. Like we're going to do a leg day. I'd prefer to go somewhere with a really cool hack squat or pendulum squat. But we're doing leg press and we got some leg extensions. They got adductor machines. So I'm going to do his session, but add in a couple of extra exercises I've got to do. So here we go.
Nice. I've got legs too. So I'm going to go and have some oats. I like to have oats like a couple of hours before I train, and then Carb X during training, and then afterwards replenish. So carbs are not the enemy. Eat your carbs. But as always, knowledge is power. When you understand carbohydrates, you realize how important they are and how you can best use them to fit your lifestyle and goals.
Indeed.
100%.
We'll catch you in the fat episode.
Yes.